How is everyone out there doing? Myself, Jeff Black, Brandon DeCruz. We're back for another week of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast because we've never missed a week, by the way. Today is episode 53. Movement is medicine. How cardio acts as the foundation for fitness and health span. Cardio was quite the demon for a long time, and you see a lot of coaches even demonize cardio, and I'm like, a healthy heart does matter. So we're going to kind of get into some of the nuances of that, like for example, how aerobic training lowers all-cause mortality and the relationship between physical activity and all-cause mortality. But we're going to let's get into how the last 7 days have been. B, how was your little Easter weekend? Did you eat any chocolate covered bunnies, anything exciting like that go on in your world? Did you engorge a little bit? Did you love yourself enough to maybe eat a hamburger? What did we do?
All right. So first and foremost, I've not had a hamburger in like 5 years. Just not my thing. No, that's the first thing. Easter bunny, not my thing either. I'm not a fan of milk chocolate. However, I did have a great week. As far as Easter went, it was just this past weekend. And, I had the opportunity to celebrate with my family. My mom made one of my favorite meals, which is a roasted stuffed chicken breast. And all the fixing. So I did enjoy that in terms of, I'm more of a food guy in terms of, I'm not really into sweet. I'm more into like salty and savory. And so those are the type of meals that I go to. So it was nice. I took Sunday, half a day Sunday off. I do work, on Sundays in terms of client check-ins. However, I took half a day off. I just spent it with my family, kicked back, relaxed, had a really good meal with them, and did one of my favorite things, which I really like. I'm the type of person, and Jeff, you know this, and anyone that's a close friend of mine, like if we go out to dinner or we have a dinner together, I'm going to be there 2 or 3 hours talking with you. And there's going to be no phone. The phone's going to be in the other room or upstairs on the charger. And it's going to be face-to-face contact, eye to eye, having deep, engaging conversations. And I was able to have one with my mother and some of my family members this weekend, which was an honor because I don't get to do that. I don't really have the opportunity. I engage all day with clients and with, mentees and with other people that I do consultation calls with. And I get it, emotional connection or, an intellectual connection with them, but I don't often get to do that with my family because we're all kind of separated and spread out. But besides that, my week's been great. Coaching has been busy, but as with all things, I try to take the mentality that being busy is a blessing. And I think that you share that ideology with me, Jeff. Like we love when we're busy because busy for us equals productivity. Whereas busy for other people, it's scrolling social media, it's bullshitting, it's watching Netflix. Like that's their quote unquote, definition of busy. But besides that, I started a new training cycle this last week where I'm hitting every muscle group twice per week so that I could spread out my total weekly training volume across 2 sessions and essentially get more effective training, more effective volume per session. But also another thing that I actually added in, I'm doing a little experiment with it, which I don't often open up about my own training on here because we're usually going into topics and research and things of that sort. But you kind of inspired me with your CGM stuff that you've been doing and opening up on the podcast. I'm doing I'm doing a BFR experiment on my arms. This is something I haven't done this. Yeah, I have
I love BFR. I do it for my legs right now.
Yes. So I have these top level cuffs. And so it was something that initially I got into. So I had utilized it years ago when it first became popular. I remember Lane Norton speaking about it and a few other practitioners speaking on the topic. And so especially a guy named Jeremy Lenicky, who has done most of the research on BFR for resistance training adaptations. And so I had utilized it when I had surgery back in 2021. But recently, I had gotten away from it. I was only using it during that rehabilitation process where I really couldn't load my body, with heavier weights essentially. And so what I've been noticing the last couple months is I've been having some elbow issues, like tendon issues. And so it's starting to hinder my arm training and my arm growth. So I'm specifically utilizing BFR during my bicep and tricep sessions, twice per week so that I can get greater muscle activation and motor unit recruitment due to, we get like the cell swelling effect, which is essentially from metabolite accumulation that comes from occluding our arms. So, basically what I'm going to do is my goal is to get a better training stimulus in my arms that I've been able to get the last 2 training cycles or so by using the BFR, which is going to allow me to use lighter weights like I've been utilizing, but getting a greater growth stimulus for them. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. And I've been through already 3 arm sessions. This morning was my 3rd time hitting arms with the BFR cuffs. And I'm utilizing the protocol that's generally used in research, which is like a 30 rep buy-in set. And essentially, you really get a lot of like your arms are fucking pumped and rushed and you're feeling like you're losing circulation essentially. And then 3 sets of 15 with 30 seconds in between each set. And I'm utilizing that on 1 to 2 exercises per body part. So both on my biceps and triceps per session, I'm doing that twice per week. So I'm really interested to see if I could bring my arms back to life essentially, because my elbows have been killing me. And I don't want to exacerbate that and have it start hindering like my pressing in terms of my chest pressing and delt pressing. So that hasn't gotten to that extent, but I really want to be proactive rather than reactive. And so I'm looking forward to that.
I was going to say Sissius really helps my elbows.
I utilize it.
Flares.
Yeah. So I actually, my last supplement company that I worked for, we actually had a raw cissus quadrangulus extract. So I've been utilizing that at a clinical dose. It's just, I don't know. It's just been a little bit of an issue, and I've noticed it. And, you know, I've done things to help in terms of my loading parameters. I've looked at different exercise selection, but it's just been something that's kind of been nagging me. So rather than just being a dumb meathead, like many of us are many of the time, where we just fight through it and keep going through it, you know, I decided to take a little bit of a different approach and utilizing the knowledge I have on these other topics and things I've utilized with both myself during injuries as well as with my clientele. And I'm going to put it back onto myself. So I'm looking forward to it. But besides that, man, how was your week?
I'll be honest. I've been adding BFR to leg training since I had my spine diagnosis, and I have gotten to where for legs I will do 7 sets of leg extensions, and I'll like you, I'll do 30 to 40 to prime it. Mm-hmm. I try to go north of 30. And then after that, you'll notice you might get 20, and then it's like 9, 13, like they're all over the place. But I usually will go so I can not complete a full rep. I'll do the same thing for adductors, same thing for leg curl. And by the time I get to like the leg press, I can do it very safe with a light amount of weight. But let's see, my last 7 days been really good. I managed to take off Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, put my phone up. Went and enjoyed some good Greek food Friday afternoon. Went and saw that Mario movie. Dude, that thing was so cool. I was so high for it though, but it was a great experience. Had a good weekend with everybody. Last big thing has kind of been on my mind, but I went and saw my chiropractor last week because I'm doing chiropractic treatment, and I trust Jensen Gillette, who is my chiropractor here in Nashville. Mm-hmm. He's very brilliant. He's always shot me straight when I saw him, but I went in and he did the spondylolisthesiosis test on my back. And he's like, yeah, man, I think it's probably about a grade 2, grade 3 slip. So we're going to be doing kind of, you know, decompression and P wave and different things like that. But I am preparing to have surgery on my spine. And I will probably do that later this year. I'm going to go ahead and search for a surgeon. I'm going to put an email out to Keegan's doctor, who does OI children only here at Vanderbilt, to at least see if he'll be in the room, because, you know, if I'm going to have someone operate on my back, I'm going to find someone who deals with athletes. You know, this is the same surgery that Ronnie Coleman had. I've read a lot about what Ronnie did after that surgery, and he didn't really take the doctor's advice really well from what I've heard on some accounts. So basically they will fuse me at L5 and S1. Which kind of won't end my bodybuilding career. It will just change the way I have to train. But I will get some stability back and I'll get my life back. But dude, I realized like this weekend when I went to that movie, for the first 45 minutes, my leg was on fire. Like, I mean, I couldn't fucking sit still. Like I was just for 40, and then it suddenly stopped. And I was like, man, like I've got a flight to Boise later this year for my birthday. I've got Key West. I've got Metallica for St. Louis, you know, in November, where I'm taking Keegan to see Metallica. I got all these like things going. I'm like, I've got Boom America to Tampa. How the fuck am I going to sit on a plane? So I'm going to suck it up, man. I am going to defy, like I did OI. I'm going to defy the expectations of surgery. Once I get it done, I will get back on that bodybuilding stage. And I have a sneaking suspicion my legs will actually be better because of it, because I think this issue's been there since I had the skateboard accident. Because if you look at my left leg and my left back, like I was pointing out to my chiro, my left erector, my left butt cheek or glute, everything over on the glute side, medius, minimus, maximus, the hamstring, quad, smaller. Well, that nerve damage, that back shattered. So I think that what I'm feeling now on my right leg is just the final decompressional bullshit, you know. But I mean, dude, I made it 28 years before I had to have a surgery with a brittle bone disease. How many people get that far in bodybuilding? And I mean, I pushed the limits. Do you know what I mean? And I've gone far. I've gone real far, and I admit that. So I'm going to finish out this prep, have a good time, and begin to look at getting a surgery done and come back kicking ass, man. I read I'm out for 6 weeks, but I'm going to bust the human growth hormone, the BPC. I'm going to do everything I can.
I'm sure this is going to be a peptide stack.
Yeah, dude, the moment I get home, I'm like, bring me my drugs, like
you're going to be asking me for PubMed IDs and everything.
Yeah.
You know what? This is actually shocking to me, even as, the audience is probably shocked, but I'm shocked even as your friend, because I know that you were essentially adamantly against surgery initially. But if this is something that's going to improve your quality of life, first and foremost, I'm 100% in support and behind you on that. But also, I know your mentality. And if anyone's going to get a surgery that is of such severity, and be able to come back from it in a great fashion, first and foremost, it's going to be you, because this is not, we have to realize that we cannot separate psychology from physiology, and your body's going to follow what your brain says. And that you are a headstrong individual, especially even if, like, most people, they get like this nocebo effect. A doctor tells you, like, I'm sure that your doctor's going to say, you're done with bodybuilding, you're done training legs, whatever. I'm just, putting out things that we would hear from physicians, and especially orthopedic surgeons. And you're going to be the person that says, F you, I'm going to be back on that bodybuilding stage. And you're going to put that out into the atmosphere or into the universe. And you're going to make that, you're going to bring that to fruition. So I'm looking, not that I want you to have surgery, but I'm looking forward to being here as a supportive friend throughout the process, but also seeing you, run up the scoreboard once again on someone and on a group, because unfortunately, we got like this medical orthodoxy that has told you umpteen things that you're not going to be able to do, or you're no longer going to be able to do, and you've disproven every single one of them. So I'm looking forward to you getting another slam dunk on them, my man.
Yeah, man, and here's the thing. Most people, if you guys look at my physique and go on Instagram, check me out, my underwear and all that shit, but you guys will see my upper body is very big. I've been downsizing lately, and I have a feeling once I get the surgery done, I'll feel better. I'll be a little bit more confident. And I think by then my body will be where I'll look very, very good as a lightweight. And, no offense. I mean, I already can't fucking squat anymore. I can lunge in place. I can do step ups. I can do leg extensions, leg curls, hip. I mean, I can do all the things, but squatting and heavy leg pressing and hack squatting. Cool. Why the hell can I get my legs back and maybe make them better for me to compete again? There's no reason not to. And, I respect what Dorian said to some degree. When Dorian came out and said, hey, the reason I didn't go for that Olympia after that tricep surgery is I couldn't train the way I wanted to. Like when I pressed, I couldn't do it. And here's the thing, man. I don't really have a fucking choice with my bone disease. I have to figure out a way to keep training to keep my livelihood. So for me, there's nothing else I have to do but figure out how to beat it. So I have all the time in the world, where Dorian didn't have that against him. He was able to say, you know what? I fulfilled it. I beat the shit out of what anyone had ever seen so far. Bye-bye. And I respect the shit out of that too.
I think we also have to realize that part of who Dorian was as a bodybuilder was HIIT training, was high intensity. He was Mr. High Intensity. So when that becomes part of your identity, you don't want to do anything but that. So if you look at him now, he looks phenomenal. Obviously, he's downsized, but he's lean. He's really agile. He does a lot of yoga, does a lot of, cardio conditioning, things of that sort. He's in phenomenal shape for someone in his late 50s. However, it was that he didn't want to transition into other forms of training, because people like Steve Weinberger, who owns Bev Francis Powerhouse, had told him, listen, you should scale back, just utilize higher volume, less intensity, lighten up the weights. And that just didn't align with his personality, with his grungy mentality of, going into that, into, the dungeon, essentially, where he used to train at, in this underground little, shithole of a gym, and really pounding out the weights in a manner that really fulfilled him. So that was something that wasn't in line or aligned with his personality, where you are willing to swallow your pride, or, be able to be amenable to the changes that are happening with your body, and being able to find a way to almost, we're really our own, scientists, we're own experiment. And so you're going to continue finding methods that are better off for where you are in life. And you're not looking back 5, 10, 15, 20 years as to what you did previously to forecast what you should be going forward. You're willing to transition and evolve as a bodybuilder. And also, I think another component of this, I'll tell you this is how I look at it. My training has changed over the years, but also that has allowed me to help more people, because our profession isn't bodybuilding competitively. We're not Mr. Olympia, nor are we ever going to be. However, trying different training ideologies, different methodologies, different principles, different approaches has allowed us to see and experience those different approaches for ourselves, and then be able to help others utilize them as well. And that's where the coaching really comes out to it. Coaching is not only taking the best of evidence, but it's also taking, empirical anecdote in our own experience and melding it with the client preferences and their abilities, and really getting this blend of both worlds between research, between anecdote, between experience, and then putting it together for that specific client. Whereas if you are just a singular bodybuilder and that is your career, you're not helping anyone else. You want no other way but your way. And that's all well and good. I respect that. But I think we have a little bit different of a path, and I enjoy that.
Yeah, and here's like my whole thing, man. I haven't taken off missed more than 3 days or 2 days ever in 28 years. How many people could ever say that? So me getting off a few weeks to be able to recover and heal up will probably do my whole body good. And when I come back, I'll feel better than ever. In the meantime, y'all tune into my social. I'll be talking shit all the way up to the surgery and talking shit all the way out like I always do. But with that being said, guys, let's get into this. So today we're going to go over how movement is as medicine. Cardio acts as the foundation for fitness and health span. I think we can all agree it's probably good to take care of the old ticker. But oftentimes you hear like, well, there's too much and then there's not enough. And it's like the Goldilocks syndrome you find, and you got women who I'll get them as a client. They'll be like, you want me to do 6 intervals of HIIT, but won't HIIT kill me? And I'm like, few intervals ain't going to hurt you, honey. It's good for your heart. If you're doing it for an hour and not eat, maybe different story, but there's different effects for different things. So we want to kind of talk about overall what cardiovascular could do to improve your health, because the fitness industry, I think at times kind of people get really confused about it's really beneficial and it's not this hindrance like some people thinks it is. It still sucks depending upon what it is. But anyway, so let's get into how does exercise impact our health span. I think it's well known that anyone who is smart would dare say that if you take care of yourself and you exercise and work out and walk, you're probably going to live better. But what does it say statistically out there, Brandon? Like, what's some data about like really taking care of yourself? What does that matter?
Yeah, so just like a little bit of an introduction to this topic in general. On last week's, conversation and podcast, we covered how we can use hypertrophy training and building muscle as a vehicle for improving health span and longevity. And within that podcast, we covered things. So if you guys didn't follow this, didn't listen to this, go back to that one, because that is going to lay the foundation for the gaps that we're going to fill in on today's podcast through the aerobic aspect of things. But we really covered the foundational, fundamental principles of improving health and health span and longevity in that initial podcast, which was episode 52. And we covered things such as top predictors of longevity and health span, the guidelines for activity versus the current stats around activity. We covered how resistance training and building muscle improve health. And then we also did things like sarcopenia. And we also looked at how muscle impacts and improves all-cause mortality. So this week, what we wanted to do was we wanted to tie up that series by covering aerobic training and how it improves and impacts health span and longevity. So today we're going to cover the benefits of aerobic training and why we should all do it, how aerobic training lowers all-cause mortality, the relationship between physical activity levels and all-cause mortality, and then also we're going to tie this up with the longevity benefits of steps. But when we look at the benefits of aerobic training, aka cardio, so this is where it's one and the same, just so everyone out there realizes, it causes our respiratory system to adapt in an effort to use and deliver oxygen more efficiently, which results in a stronger heart and lungs, which provides us with some benefits that resistance training doesn't, and also adds to some of the benefits resistance training provides us with, which is why it's important to do both, because it has some, singular effects, but then it has some additive effects. So cardio provides us with a multitude of benefits as it improves cardiovascular health and reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease, which is especially important as 1/3 of Americans today die of a cardiovascular related disease or event. It also improves aerobic fitness and aerobic capacity. And these aerobic fitness improvements can be seen by increases in VO2 max that we get from doing cardio. And this improvement in VO2 max increases the amount of oxygen that essentially can be consumed and used by our muscles. So we're increasing that oxygen delivery and utilization. And when we look at the actual research on longevity, we see that VO2 max is the strongest predictor of future health and all-cause mortality. So this is hugely beneficial. This is a hugely beneficial adaptation that we can get from aerobic training and from doing cardio. Cardio also helps to improve different health metrics. So for instance, cardio decreases resting heart rate by improving heart health and function. As when our heart is strong and is conditioned, it doesn't have to work as hard to pump blood, which decreases our resting heart rate. And then it also reduces blood pressure, which can lower the risk of hypertension, which is essentially the silent killer. So this is essentially a health metric that is the underlying root cause of a lot of other illnesses that we see today. Another thing that it does is it increases mitochondrial biogenesis, which is essentially the creation of more mitochondria, which leads to greater energy production. But cardio doesn't just increase mitochondrial biogenesis. We not only develop more mitochondria through aerobic training, but we also improve mitochondrial function. So they're able to produce energy more efficiently. Another adaptation that we get from cardio is it increases stroke volume, which allows for more blood to be pumped with each contraction. So each heart contraction, we're getting more blood to the muscles and to the rest of our body. And in addition to that, cardio provides a ton of metabolic benefits. So we know that it improves insulin sensitivity, improves nutrient partitioning and blood glucose management. It improves metabolic flexibility, which is something we've done an entire deep dive on. But essentially what we see from aerobic training is we're more able to efficiently switch between utilizing fat and glucose for fuel, which is important as our metabolism is based on the aerobic system. So really, when we look at it, our resting metabolic rate runs off of fat oxidation. So if we can improve our aerobic fitness and our aerobic capacity, we can more effectively burn fat at rest, which will spare our glycogen stores for when we're engaged in higher intensity activities like resistance training. And we need glucose to fuel that glycolytic activity. So instead of, if you're metabolically inefficient or you're metabolically inflexible, essentially what you're doing is you're burning off essentially everything that you do, even a walk in the park is a higher intensity activity for you because you're out of shape, you're unfit. So then you're burning through glycogen stores that could be utilized for higher intensity exercise, but then you're somewhat depleted. And so we really need to improve this metabolic flexibility. And one great way to do that is through aerobic training. In addition to that, we see increases in energy expenditure, which can help with maintaining a lean, healthy body composition. And last but not least, we see that cardio improves recovery by increasing blood flow and nutrient delivery. And this is especially important for those of us who are primarily focused on hypertrophy training, as resistance training is an anaerobic activity, whereas recovering in between sets is heavily dependent on our aerobic system. So by doing cardio, we can improve, or we can essentially build our aerobic base and recover quicker. And then we can also recover more efficiently in between sets, in between exercises, and in between training sessions. Now, when we look at aerobic training and how it lowers all-cause mortality, there's a ton of data on this. So, Jeff, did you want to add anything to the benefits of cardio? Because I know you're a fan of cardio yourself, so there may be some things that I missed out on that you want to extrapolate further on.
No, I think people are very, very gun shy about it. And for me, I'm one of those people like, doesn't hurt to get some extra steps in first thing in the morning fasted. It doesn't hurt to do a little hit. It doesn't hurt to do a little miss. Keep it up, keep it fresh. But I do think that there's something being said for, we always pay attention to what the scale says, but you should be looking at like what your heart says. And if you use like an Oura ring or a Whoop, you're looking for your resting heart rate to get better. You're looking for your HRV to at least maybe get better. Like I still have my doubts on some of the technology. I think that'll take time, but they're down the right path. But there's just certain biofeedbacks that cardiovascular things could do for you. Like it especially hits really good for people to help clear up glucose problems, is provided that they're not like jammed with some issues. So no, I think you covered it really well. I just think most people are either confused by it, they don't like it, or they don't know how to implement it without screwing themselves up. And I kind of think you see that. And that's kind of like the vibe I get from my gym members when I chat with them. But I watch one dude, he literally has this deal. Like he has like 12 weeks of cardio and every week's different for 12 weeks straight. And that is what he needs. And then you see some people like me, I like that step mill, I mean?
Absolutely.
So, but no, really, I thought you covered really good.
Really, when it comes down to it, it's about finding a modality that's going to stress the cardiovascular system in some aspect. It could be on the treadmill. It could be running outside. It could be rucking. It could be on the step mill. It could be on the Concept 2, whatever it may be. But really, what we want to do is have a multimodal approach to improving our fitness, our body composition, and our health. And that's why within the series, we've covered resistance training, building muscle. We're going to cover, right now we're covering aerobic training, but then we're also going to go into physical activity. We're going to go into steps later on in this podcast, because there's so many multi-pronged benefits of having an all-encompassing approach. And that's where I really see a lot of people in our industry. It's like they're in one camp. So they're in the resistance training only camp and they're fuck cardio crew. They're in that group, or they're in the, endurance training camp where it's like, they don't want to resistance train because they don't want to get into a weight room. And really, when it comes down to it, if you are someone that's looking to better your body composition, improve your metabolic health, increase your health span, improve your quality of life, you should be utilizing every tool available to you that has proven benefits and an ability to be applied in your daily life that you can leverage all of the beneficial effects from in order to optimize the outcomes that you're looking for.
I agree with that 100%. But what are the benefits of aerobic training and why should we do it? And are you going to go over target heart rate zones and things like that when we're going over this kind of stuff? Or is this just more in the cardiovascular sense?
No, so we're going to cover on today's podcast pretty much just aerobic training, physical activity, and steps and their implication on health span. However, if you want to do, and this is something I've actually had a couple of questions about, is like the different cardio zones, and then something called concurrent training, which is the combination of aerobic and resistance training and the implications that they have on each other. We can do that in next week's podcast by all means.
Dude, I think that'd be cool. I think that would maybe alleviate some of the confusion. We could talk about like scenarios like we utilize with clients. Like, hey,
Absolutely.
if you're, recovering from hypomedical biliruria, you don't want to be in these zones, and then talk about if you're highly stressed. So I think that's cool. Yeah, let's do it. So let's get into the benefits of aerobic training. Why should we do it?
Yeah, so that we already covered that, but what I didn't get to cover yet was how aerobic training lowers all-cause mortality.
That was the next one. Okay, sorry.
No worries, brother. So aerobic training can substantially lower all-cause mortality in many ways, but the most notable way it does so is by improving our cardiorespiratory fitness and increasing our VO2 max. So VO2 max is considered the greatest predictor of all-cause mortality. So if we can increase this metric, it will decrease our chance of mortality of all causes. And one of the landmark studies that shows how impactful cardiorespiratory fitness is on all-cause mortality was published in JAMA in 2018. So in this study, they looked at cardiorespiratory fitness and divided individuals into 5 categories based on their performance on a treadmill test. So that's how they differentiated like low fitness, high fitness. But within these 5 categories, how they divided them up was they had a low fitness category, and that was those in the below 25th percentile. Then they had below average, which was 25 to the 49th percentile. They had above average, was the 50 to 74th percentile, and then high, which was 75 to, I believe, 97.6. And then the elite was 97.7% and above. So that was that really, upper tier category of the best and most elite aerobic fitness. And what they found was by just going from the low group to the below average group, we see a 50% reduction in all-cause mortality and a 0.5 reduction in hazard ratio for all patients. And as you continue to improve your cardiorespiratory fitness, all-cause mortality continues to reduce. So there's this linear dose response. The more cardiovascularly fit you are, the higher your VO2 max, the lower your all-cause mortality rate. But what was really interesting about this study in particular is they also looked at the all-cause mortality rates of different comorbidities and compared them to the mortality rate differences between different cardiorespiratory fitness levels. So essentially what they wanted to do was they wanted to look at some of the leading causes of death in the United States and in the country and compare what is the hazard ratio, what is the increased risk in all-cause mortality, and then compare it to the differences in cardiorespiratory fitness. So when they looked at different comorbidities, they found that those with diabetes are at a 40% increased risk of all-cause mortality. Then those with coronary artery disease were at a 29% increased risk of mortality. Those with hypertension, so high blood pressure, were at a 21% increase of all-cause mortality. And last, they found that those who were actively smoking or were smokers in the past had a 41% increase in all-cause mortality. So we really see any of these comorbidities that are associated with death were between 21 and 41% increase in all-cause mortality. So keep that number in mind, Jeff. Yet, when they looked at other indices for cardiorespiratory fitness, they found that being in the low group for cardiorespiratory fitness as compared to the elite group was a 5-fold increased risk of mortality, meaning that those in the low group had a 504% increase in mortality, which is substantially higher risk than any of the comorbidities that I just listed. So essentially what they found was being in poor aerobic fitness may be more harmful to our health than these other disease conditions. Now, I know that not everyone's going to be able to get to elite levels of cardiorespiratory fitness, but when we look at the difference between even the low group, so those in the lowest group of cardiorespiratory fitness, and then we compare them with the ones in the above average. So, we're in the 50 to 74th percentile. We see that they have a 275% greater risk of all-cause mortality in the next decade. So say we inverse that. If we are to go from the low to the above average group, we can decrease our mortality risk by 275%. Which is essentially done by improving our aerobic capacity to above average, and we get this drastic decrease in all-cause mortality as a result. And so across the literature, we see that those who are fitter and have above normal levels of cardiorespiratory fitness have increased health span, a lower incidence of metabolic disease, and a lower rate of all-cause mortality. So for example, there's a 2016 population follow-up study which looked at the long-term changes in cardiorespiratory fitness and all-cause mortality. And they found that for every 1 point increase in VO2 max, there was a 9% decrease in relative risk of all-cause mortality. And when they looked at this risk reduction, it was seen even when they adjusted and counted for a person's baseline age, their systolic blood pressure, their smoking status, their LDL and their HDL, and their triglyceride levels, their C-reactive protein, their body mass index, their alcohol consumption, and also if they had a history of type 2 diabetes or heart disease. And the reason why aerobic training is so crucial for improving health span and longevity is because the higher we get our VO2 max, the lower our risk for all-cause mortality. So research has shown that by focusing on improving our aerobic fitness, even if we've spent most of our lives in an unfit condition, we'll have drastic improvements on our all-cause mortality risk. So for example, there's a study which it's called the Aerobic Center Longitudinal Study. And essentially what researchers did was they looked at the relationships between changes in physical fitness and the risk of mortality in men over the course of 5 years. So they looked at men at the beginning of this 5-year intervention and at the end of the 5-year intervention. And what they found was that those that had the highest risk of all-cause mortality rates were those who were in the unfit group. They were unfit essentially at year 1 and at year 5. So the beginning or the start of the study and at the end. However, men who improved from being unfit to fit between the first and subsequent examination, so say from the first starting point to year 5, had a reduction in mortality risk of 44% relative to men who remained unfit at both examinations, which this pretty much just shows like the profound effect improving our aerobic fitness can have on all-cause mortality. Now, although aerobic training can have an enormous benefit on health span, on longevity, and on lowering all-cause mortality, this doesn't mean that we want to trade in our memberships for running shoes. You know what I mean? I'm not implying or encouraging people to stop training with weights and just go to becoming runners. That's not what we're going for. And I want to hit on that because it isn't this either or thing. It's not this dichotomous relationship. We're either doing aerobic training or resistance training, because what we see is when we combine the two, we see even greater benefits from doing both than doing either or. And so there was a 2022 review where researchers looked at the mortality reducing benefits of strength training alone, aerobic work alone, or a combination of both to see if there was a better approach for improving health span. And in every category that they looked at, including the reduction in risk of things like all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, and obesity, they found an additive effect of doing both resistance training and aerobic training on risk reduction than just doing one of the two forms. So we see the synergistic effect from doing both together rather than just doing one of the other, or doing a massive amount of one or a massive amount of the other. And what they found was that by combining aerobic training with resistance training, all-cause mortality was reduced by 40%, cardiovascular disease risk was reduced by 50%, cancer rates were reduced by about 35%, type 2 diabetes was reduced by 60%, and obesity was reduced by 40%. So there are substantial reductions which can come from taking a multimodal approach like I was hitting on before to our fitness endeavors, which is why, on this podcast, you and I have covered this so many times over the past, like we don't just take, it's not one ring to rule them all. It's not just like, yes, we come from a bodybuilding background. We've coached bodybuilders and we've really, focused on body composition. And one of the main tools that we utilize is resistance training. Like you own a gym, you know what I mean? But at the same time, we're fans of utilizing multiple tools to get people better results.
I think that's the best way you could say it, results, because ultimately everybody wants the longevity concept. And every book I've ever read in the woo-woo space that you always kind of, me and you just joke about back and forth that I read, they always do talk about the cardiovascular component being a big ass one, and all the all-cause mortality stuff, exercise, some form of activity is always mentioned, man.
Absolutely.
So
well, think about it like this, and this is something we really should hit on just briefly. When we look at longevity, I'm really big on health span, because for me, it's about adding years or life to my years rather than years to my life. That isn't really like right now in the position I'm in. I'm not really concerned about like being a centenarian, living to 100 or plus. I really want to make sure that I have what's called compressed morbidity, meaning that the amount of years that I'm sick is small. Whereas right now we're seeing lifespan extend. Whereas we're not seeing health span extend. So we're seeing people live longer, but essentially that latter portion of their life is extending, but they're just sick for longer, essentially, because modern medicine is keeping people alive for longer. And so what I'm really after is increased health span, meaning a longer protraction of years where I'm physically fit, functional, I'm in good shape, I'm able to do things, activities of daily living and things of that sort. And within longevity, a lot of people will just hit on, things like caloric restriction, fasting, autophagy, things like that. But the number one thing that induces autophagy from a signaling perspective, like going on the AMPK pathway, is exercise. And so we can't discount that. Yes, diet has a huge component to it. Fasting is a method of inducing caloric restriction. We see that calorie restriction in and of itself can extend lifespan because it's turning on all these pathways that deal with mitophagy, so the cellular cleaning of mitochondria and replenishing all those type of cellular pathways. However, exercise is one of the number one modalities. So sometimes there's people that will literally, I find it quite ironic that some people in the longevity space they're always talking about the next supplement, the next diet trend, the next whatever protocol. But oftentimes they overlook the exercise benefits, and there's so many benefits to exercise that we can't overlook.
I agree 100%. Now, the next one we have to go over is the relationship between physical activity and all-cause mortality. But you did go over some of that. Is there any other little things you want to button up, or do we want to move on to the longevity benefits of steps?
No, dude, there's a lot in physical activity. I would definitely want to hit on this because this is something that I think a lot of people are not aware of. And so I want to bring light to this. So, anyone who's been a longtime listener of the show or the podcast knows that we're big advocates of not only resistance and aerobic training, but also big fans of remaining physically active throughout the rest of our days outside of the formal training we do in the gym, which is why we've covered, if we really think about it, we've done several episodes over the last year where we've covered the multifaceted benefits of staying physically active and maintaining high levels of need. And in today's episode, we're going to focus on the role that physical activity and sedentary behavior play in our health span. But if you're new to the podcast or you haven't been listening since the original, the original tapings of the show, and want to learn more about the benefits that physical activity can have on your body composition, on your energy expenditure, on appetite regulation, or any of these other things or aspects of that impact how you look and how you feel, I encourage you to check out some of the following episodes because we've covered this in greater detail, and I'm going to only specifically cover how physical activity and sedentary behavior impact lifespan. And so if you go back to episode 8, we covered how to increase your total daily energy expenditure through NEAT and physical activity. Episode 9 was our all-inclusive guide to NEAT. We have episode 10, which touched on the concept of exercise resistance and how physical activity plays into that. And then we have episode 18, which was on the concept of high energy flux and how to utilize it to regulate body fat levels, appetite, and manage hunger. And then episode 35, actually I posted about this today, was on the science behind post-meal walks. So those are other episodes that will cover some of physical activity benefits. But when we look at how physical activity levels play a massive role in our health span, we've had this data that has shown that physical activity levels are closely linked to longevity and health span since the 50s. So physical activity has been shown to have a massive impact on cardiovascular disease, which is the leading killer in the US today. So for example, in a study by Morris, they looked at 31,000 men ages 35 to 64 working jobs such as bus drivers and conductors. And what they found was that the conductors had a lower rate of coronary heart disease than drivers, and that men in physically active jobs had a lower incidence of coronary heart disease than men of the same age group in physically inactive jobs. And the reason for this was because the drivers spent much of their day, or a much larger percentage of their days, sitting, like throughout their work days, and driving, while conductors were more physically active on the train and on the railroad. In another, 16-year follow-up study in 300 or over 3,000 longshoremen in San Francisco, it was found that men with more sedentary jobs expended an average of 925 calories less per day and had a higher rate or death rate from coronary heart disease than cargo handlers. So engaging in higher levels of physical activity could substantially reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. So that's the first link we see, is physical activity levels, having higher physical activity levels leads to lower rates of cardiovascular disease. Now, if we transition from looking at physical activity levels in CVD, and we look at physical activity levels in all-cause mortality, we see in research, we have studies such as from Paffenberger, which looked at physical activity levels and all-cause mortality in almost 17,000 men aged 35 to 74. And this study found that exercise reported as either walking, stair climbing, and sports-related play related inversely to total mortality, primarily to death due to cardiovascular or respiratory causes. So death rates declined steadily as energy expenditure on physical activity increased. So what they found was that when you went from under 500 calories expended per week to over 3,500 calories per week, the rates of mortality were lower. So they saw this declining fashion. And these effects were shown even independent of someone's smoking status, having hypertension, and their body weight. And so the reason that physical activity has such a large benefit on our health and mortality is because it keeps us active throughout the day and reduces sedentary behaviors like sitting, which can have drastic effects on our health, which is why, if we really think about it, like I'm sure everyone out here, we've talked about this, you and I, where there's a lot of terminology or statements that are being made in today's society by researchers and by doctors where they say sitting is the new smoking. And there's research behind that as, why they make that comparison. So yes, it is a statement made for impact to really like impact people like, listen, you need to be less sedentary. But if we actually look on the data behind this, there was a 2015 systematic review and meta-analysis of 47 studies. And they looked at all-cause mortality rates from multiple countries, including the US, and found that being sedentary increases the risk of mortality in all countries. And they also found that prolonged sitting independently increases the risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease and mortality, cancer risk and cancer mortality, and total mortality. Now, one way to attenuate the health detriments that come along with being sedentary is to increase our levels of physical activity and remain more active throughout the day because, besides our intentional exercise and training sessions. So in a 2022 study or 2012 study rather, they looked at the relationship between physical activity levels and all-cause mortality. And they specifically compared groups of different levels of physical activity to a group that did 0 hours of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity to see the difference in the mortality risk and how many years of life was gained from different levels of physical activity. And what they found was that the hazard ratio of mortality steadily declined when they went from 0 to 30 met hours per week of physical activity. And the years of life gained steadily inclined from 0 to 30 met hours of physical activity. So for example, they found that those in the highest levels of physical activity who did on average 22.5 met hours or more saw a gain of 4.5 years added to their lifetimes. What's great about this study, though, is they did a breakdown because for us, like to say 22.5 met hours, that doesn't mean anything because you're going to have to break that down. And there is a physical activity compendium that you could utilize to like back calculate that. But the researchers did this for us, luckily. And what they found was 22.5 met hours per week would be 7.5 hours of brisk walking per week. So those in that group had a life extension of almost 5 years. So we currently have evidence and data that finds that engaging in moderate to higher levels of physical activity done through either moderate forms of activity like walking or activities of daily living lowers the risk of developing heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, and insulin resistance, even like Alzheimer's and dementia, and then all-cause mortality, which is why being active throughout our lifetime is so beneficial.
What about the longevity benefits of steps? Now we've done podcasts about this. We've peppered our social media about it. I know that once anything below 3,000, hello death quickly. And I think once you get to about 10,000 or 8,000, things go down. But once you get past 15, 20,000, things aren't any better. So what is
My shock you on this one, my man.
What does the research say? So let's hit it up.
All right. So my man, you know that we couldn't finish off this podcast on how movement acts as medicine and how aerobic activities can improve our health and our longevity without me covering steps and how this impacts these markers. And there's a ton of benefits behind doing steps that we've covered multiple times on the show. But when it comes to how different step counts affect our health span, there's actually some recent research, which I'm going to cover today, which has shown profound benefits from a longevity perspective. So, for example, there was a meta-analysis that came out last year by Giletti, I believe. And what they did was researchers essentially investigated the association between step count per day and all-cause mortality risk. And this meta-analysis looked at over 28,000 participants and found that for every 1,000 steps increase per day, so when you average 1,000 steps per day, it led to a 12% reduction in all-cause mortality risk. And what they found was there was a linear dose response up to 17,000 steps per day. So the risk decreased linearly from 2,700 steps per day until 17,000 steps per day. So for example, in the studies they analyzed in this meta-analysis, those, they had certain studies that only looked up to like 16,000 steps per day. However, in those studies, what they found was that walking 16,000 steps per day had a 66% reduction in all-cause mortality risk as compared to walking 2,700 steps per day. So comparing the lowest step count groups to the highest step count groups reporting these studies, including the meta-analysis, this 16,000 steps led to a massive reduction in all-cause mortality risk. But if we were to reverse that and we state it conversely, if you are to only walk 27,000 or 2,700 steps per day in comparison to 16,000 steps per day, that's associated with a threefold greater increase in all-cause mortality than those walking 1,600 steps or 16,000 steps per day. So this is a substantial difference between the two. Now, there was also another meta-analysis released last year where researchers looked at the daily steps and all-cause mortality across 15 international cohorts. And in this study, they split people into 4 different quartiles based on their average daily step count. So quartile 1 was around 3,500 steps per day. Quartile 2 was around 5,800 steps per day. Quartile 3 was 7,800 steps per day. And then quartile 4 was 11,000 steps per day. And what this meta-analysis found was there was a dose response to the amount of steps and reduction in mortality risk. So the individuals doing 11,000 steps per day had a 53% lower risk of mortality than those doing 3,500 steps per day. So the great thing about this data is you can literally start with baby steps, both literally and figuratively. You could just get up and go for a 10-minute walk, or, after a meal, like we spoke about a little bit earlier today, or go for a walk while listening to even this podcast. And this is something that it's so simple to not only do, but implement. So everyone can, get a benefit from increasing, whether it be their aerobic training, whether it be their steps. You can get a health and longevity perspective or longevity benefit from doing these things. And if your goal is to have a higher quality of life across a life course, I encourage you to take a more proactive approach and take the information that we've provided in these last 2 episodes on the vast benefits of resistance training, aerobic training, physical activity, and steps, and utilize it as another motivating factor to get active and to stay active. So, this is the summation of our series, but really when it comes down to it, if you guys are trying to live a more beneficial, higher quality of life, these are things that you can utilize this information, take it and implement it in your daily lifestyle and extend that health span, improve upon that health span, and subsequently improve your longevity as well.
I'll be honest. I tell everybody this who argues me about taking steps. I'm always like, you know what? Go out there and do it. Get some sunshine on your face. Get to feeling better. Just move around. Even sweep your damn house. Just do some stuff. But there's sometimes, I don't know, like Stephen Pressfield, he mentors me in my writing my book and all. He's been a great, great dude. But he talks about in turning pro, there was a time where he just started washing the dishes and it felt good and he just kept washing it. Sometimes just moving around is the cure to what ails you. I always tell people, I think steps is a great way to do it.
100%, my man. I mean, it's another thing, that a daily win that we can take, and it costs us nothing first and foremost, but it has additive effects to our body composition, our health, our quality of life, and all other parameters. So if it's something like, these are low-hanging fruit that we can utilize, a cardio session or 2 per week that you can add into your already existing fitness program, hitting a target step count per day, whether that be 8,500 steps or 10,000 steps, whatever it may be. These are little low-hanging fruit that you guys can implement and really improve your body composition, your lifestyle, your metabolic health, and so many other aspects that a lot of the listeners to this show are shooting for, and they're looking for information how to do so. These are things that you can implement right after listening to the show. So I'm all for this.
Dude, where can everybody find you at?
Guys, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at Brandon DeCruz _ or on my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. As always, thank you guys for listening to the podcast and providing us with your support and also your feedback. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the show. That's something we really trying to get out there with this no-cost content and really provide you guys with value. And as always, if you guys have any other topics that you guys want us to expand upon, Jeff and I are always open to your feedback, whether it's constructive criticism, it's harsh criticism, or it's just, a little bit of appraisal for us. So as always, we appreciate you guys. But Jeff, where can they find you, my man?
Jeff Unbreakable Black on IG, Relentless Forever on YouTube. And I don't want your negative fucking feedback. It's all got to be good stuff. You could give Brandon all the negative stuff. I get enough of that from my staff. But anyway, dude, I guess I'll see you next week, man. I hope you have yourself a badass week, guys. Thank you again for all your support. We appreciate it. Be sure to share the episode, like it, get it out there. Thanks, everyone.
Peace.
Peace.